All right, hi, I'm Steve Martinelli out of WVMO, the voice of Monona and the Monona Community Media Channel. We're celebrating the 40th anniversary of the 1977 state championship football team. And with me today, very special guest, son of the late coach Dick Rundle, Mark Rundle. Mark, I really appreciate your time talking to me today. We've talked to a number of players already, and all of them had wonderful things to say about your dad. We just want to get a little more insight. Tell me first, when we talked on the phone, you said you've been around his teams for 50-some years.
Yeah.
You grew up around his team. When he coached the first state champs, were there any special players that you hung out with? You were just in middle school at the time.
Oh yeah, I mean I didn't hang out with them then because I was, 7th or 8th grade, but I knew them all. My dad was bringing me up here from when I was 3 years old. I'm 53 now, so on and off I've been coming up here over a 50-year span. So I told Mike this is like my living room coming up here.
Yeah, I imagine so.
Coming up here is so normal to me. It's as soon as I could walk, my dad had me up here, so I know just about people from every team.
Were there any players that were particularly nice to you that you looked up to? Or?
They had to be nice to me.
Well, I suppose.
But anyway, you know, obviously Mike was in Mike's wedding, played softball with him, and coached with Mike for 13 years, I think it was. But I mean, very close with Mike. I love Mike, and my dad and Mike Stasi, two of them. I played football from 3rd grade through college, and so you see a lot of competitors, but none of them more competitive than Mike and my dad. And there's nothing like walking from the locker room up to the field at Monona with Mike. It's like you're going to war.
So is it just as good with Brandon? I mean, it's a new feeling with a new coach.
Yep, I knew Mike was getting ready to retire. We'd been talking about it, and I'd been nudging Brandon for 2 or 3 years and kept saying, "You're the guy. You got to be the guy." And he was a little reluctant at first, but he's taken right over. I mean, Mike carried on my dad's traditions, and Brandon has definitely done that too. Probably the reason I'm still hanging around. I mean, they tolerate me up here, but I love to see it. You can still feel my dad's stamp on things.
Oh, definitely. When we do the broadcasts, I don't know if you've heard many of them, we talk about MG football, and that refers to the way your dad played the game and coached it. And
you're expected to win here.
Yeah.
I remember at a basketball game once, I'm getting off topic already, but I was sitting behind a family from Oregon, and Oregon's up by 22 at half, and the wife says to the guy in front of me, "Why don't we leave? This game's over." And the man looked at her and said, "We're at Monona Grove. It's never over here." He said, "These kids are different." And I think it stems all the way back from the John Clement, Dick Rundle, John Verhelst, Frank Levac, all those guys built that mentality here.
Absolutely. Let's, I got a question here. Your dad was a star athlete in high school and college. They honored him. He's in the Luther College Hall of Fame now. Yeah. Used to play in big games. Was there some ritual or superstitions or something he did to prepare himself for a big game or prepare the team for a big game?
He was not real outwardly emotional about it. He would go within himself. He'd get super quiet. I can remember at an early age, I'd be asking my dad dumb questions as a little kid. My mom would say, leave him alone for a day. We can talk to him tomorrow. But I didn't know till just recently how superstitious he was. I was in the house about 4 years ago, and my dad walked out the front door, walked to the edge of the car, crossed the car, down the driveway, and over. He could have gone a straight line. And I said to my mom, I go, "Why did Dad take that weird route?" She goes, "He's done that his whole life." She goes, "He's never gone to the left side of that car." And I never saw that my whole life. And when I saw that, I started seeing other things he did. But I didn't know. He told me right before he died, there was a play that the Chicago Bears ran that we were running before that. We called it the Double B Bongo. It was basically, remember when they put Refrigerator Perry in the backfield as a blocking back? We were doing that 2 years before. And he called it the Double B. And nobody ever knew what the Double B meant. And then one day I was on Cottage Grove Road, which I never knew was County Highway BB, that connected Monona and Cottage Grove. So I called him up at the stoplight. I said, "Double B Bongo." And he said, "Yeah." And I go, "Is that after the County Highway BB?" And he goes, "Yeah." He goes, "It took you long enough to figure that out." But in his mind, that connected the two cities, you know.
Yeah, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. So there was a lot of weird superstitions that he hid pretty well, but as he got older, we started figuring them out.
Yeah, see, I would have never guessed that from him because he was so ultra prepared for games and the team felt so ready. We asked Dave Schlack, at what point he felt confident that he was on a championship team in that 77th season, and he said in August, because we were so well coached. They had us believing we were going to win the state championship back in August.
It's funny though, because I'll guarantee you my dad thought they were going to lose every game.
Well, Goff tells stories about your dad selling every opponent as the best team you've ever played. You know, they could compete with the Packers and were,
Yeah.
you know. But yet he was a salesman.
He passed that on to Mike Stasi because Mike wasn't as nervous playing Wanakee as he was playing in Monroe, which sounds silly. Wanakee's one of the best teams in the state, and Monroe had a lot of bad years. Mike was more stressed and worried in those weeks than he was playing Wanakee. And he said, I can explain to somebody why we lost to Wanakee. I can't explain why we lost to Monroe.
Yeah.
And my dad was the same way. He thought he was going to lose every game.
Really?
Definitely. That was the way he prepared himself.
What was your dad like after a rare loss? I mean, he didn't lose many games.
Luckily, there weren't a lot of those.
Yeah.
And I think I heard a stat once that he didn't lose 2 in a row for 22 years.
Oh, I believe it.
So if he lost, it was, he was never mean or angry, but he would just shut down. The next week, until he won again, he didn't talk. You could just see it in his face. He had to figure out how to win again. He hated losing.
Yeah, that's interesting. So what did he do when he was relaxing? Did he ever get away from football? Or?
He didn't relax much. I know that sounds like a overstatement, but he really never relaxed. He bought a trailer on the lake up in Montello on Lake Puckaway. I've never seen him more relaxed in my life up there. He loved to read newspapers. He would read 3 or 4 a day, front to back, not missing a word. And when he was doing that, you couldn't get his attention. He read it voraciously on that stuff. I never saw him more relaxed than at that trailer. And at the end of the first summer, he called me up and said, "Sell that thing."
Really?
Yeah, he was not comfortable being relaxed.
See, the image most of us in the public had was just of football, and so it's almost impossible for us to envision him doing anything other than football. You know, I don't see your dad scrapbooking or playing ping pong with George Harrell, or I see him drawing up plays in the kitchen counter.
That's all he did. The only thing that slowed that down is when my sisters started having kids.
Okay.
That was the only thing that stopped him from designing the next football play. He really was. Like I said before, I don't know if we talked about that yet or not, but he died at 4 a.m. He went to bed that night at 10 o'clock, and when my mom finally was able to talk after he passed, she took me over to the table and showed me that right before bed he designed a play. He ripped off a piece of newspaper and wrote it on the corner, and that was the last thing he did before he died.
I loved it in games when he was convinced a certain play would work, and he would run it over and over and over again. Like in the championship game, he runs Mark Goff on a 56 belly like 7-8 times in a row. And it wasn't any big gainers the whole time, but it was just marching down the field.
He would do that to me. We were winning 19-12. We're undefeated and playing the team that had no wins. So we should have been up at halftime. We're down 12-0. So he basically said at half, we're going to run 56 left, 56 right, the rest of the game, and you're going to do it right, and we're going to win. And we did, 19-12. But he was funny. I mean, he was known as Tricky Dick for all the trick plays he had.
Sure.
But I remember when he played Platteville, and my dad, at the end of my dad's career, some of the teams weren't that powerful, and people were lining up to try to beat my dad. And Platteville was on a really good run, Platteville High School. And Platteville radio channel called our house and said, "You're Tricky Dick Rundle, you're going to come in here and throw the bounce pass and reverses." And my dad said, "I am known for that, but we're coming to Platteville to run through your 6-hole. We're going to run between your tight end and your tackle, and we're going to do that the whole night." And they ended up going down there doing that and beating a better team at Platteville. And Mark Berg, the coach at Platteville, said, "I heard your radio interview. It scared the heck out of me because I thought, you're lying. You're going to come in here and trick me." He goes, "And all you did is run that one play." And that's what he did. That was how sure he was. If you ran a play the way he coached it, it didn't matter if the other team knew it, he'd still win.
Sure.
He was pretty as much as he worried about everything, he was pretty confident.
Now, you were talking about playing for him. You got to play a couple years for him on varsity. You were quarterback and kicker.
Yeah.
What was it like playing for your dad? I mean,
it was, it probably was worse than I imagined. It didn't bother me because my dad was pushed me my whole life. And he'd push you if he was with you. He'd pushed everybody. That was he thought that was why he was here in life, was to make people better. He really did. I mean, even at McDonald's, if the kid wasn't doing it well enough at the counter, he'd say, you should be doing that better.
Sure.
And kids would just look at him like, "Oh my God, who's this?" But he pushed me hard. In fact, my teammates would gang up on my side and fight back and, leave him alone. But it was fine. I mean, we'd go home and he took that as more practice time. We were having dinner one night, and he said, I don't like running players in to call plays, so from now on, if I touch my right shoulder, we're going in the right 2-hole. If I touch my hip, it's the right 4-hole, and so on. So we're working out a code system at dinner, and finally my mom, said, that's enough, no more football at the table.
So is it hard for him to separate that coach, quarterback, father, son thing, or?
I don't know if it was or not. I mean, he pushed everybody hard, and that, like I said, he didn't give everybody a break. He wanted to get the best out of everybody he ran into. I don't think he definitely didn't give me a break, but I don't think he was over the top hard on me. He always said, I got to be harder on you because if you don't play well, the media is going to think you're playing because you're my son.
Sure.
And that can't be the way it's going to be. But
So-
luckily, we didn't have a lot of quarterbacks. I shouldn't even have been playing quarterback. He kind of made me do it. So.
So I got an opportunity one time at a basketball game to sit next to Frank Levac and talk with him about the game throughout the entire game. I can only imagine what it was like sitting at home with your dad watching the Packers or something play. Was he the coach back then too?
Oh yeah, all the time. In fact, last night the coaches now came to my house and watched the Packer game, and after the first play they had an incomplete pass, and I said they're going to have a terrible year. That's what my dad would say every year. Every year the Packers are going to be terrible, the Badgers are going to be terrible. He thought that of every team. And about the best story to tell about that is we went to a game. I used to have 4 tickets in one row and he had 2 in front of me. And he would always not go. He wanted the extra space. He didn't like anybody rubbing up on him. So I said to Jeff Femright, my buddy of mine from Monona Grove, said, I'd love to sit by your dad. And I said, well, he'd rather sit alone. And Jeff said, I'm going to ask him. So he said, Dick, can I sit by you? And my dad said, yeah, my dad liked Jeff. So Jeff, we walked out of the stadium at the end of the game, and Jeff put his hands up. He said, I now know more about football than 99% of the people in the world. He said, your dad, when they went to the line, would say they're going to run through the right 4-hole, and they would. As soon as they lined up and saw the alignment and the place on the field, he could pretty much call the play.
Sure. Pretty amazing. When did you realize you wanted to coach? What drew you into it?
I never really set out to be a coach. I have some friends that say you're trying to be like your dad, and I laugh at that because I could never do it like my dad. I mean, not many people can. In fact, even today, I mean, my dad's style probably wouldn't work that well. I mean, my dad pushed kids to the limit, and nowadays you can't do that all the time, and it's gotten to be more technical. I mean, with the apps, by the time we get home after a game, we already have the film on our phones, and we have the next 2 weeks' opponents, and that's not how they did it back then. Back then, they lined up, and you just beat the guy across from you. So I never really set out to coach. You talked about Scott Knipfer before. He was the first kid I coached, and I saw him on TV just doing a couple things a little bit wrong. And I told Mike when I saw him, and Mike said, "Why don't you come up and show him yourself?" So it was supposed to be one day, and we had a good day that day. And I said, "Good luck. I'll be watching you on TV." And Scotty said, "Are you going to come tomorrow?" And I wasn't going to. And Mike says, "Why don't you come one more day?" And then now this is my 15th year. It's just I've never left. I don't know if they plan on that.
Just one more day.
That's right.
That's pretty funny. Who are some of the better kickers you remember? I mean, obviously Scott was a good one, and Colin Larsh has walked on for the Badgers now.
Yeah, definitely Colin Larsh. I mean, Colin Larsh was born to be a kicker. That kid's kicked 5 million balls, I bet, in his life. He was good when I got him. My job was just a little tweaks with him. He came here a good kicker. Scotty Knipfer was great. Everyone just needs a couple little tweaks because there's not a lot of kicking coaches around. I didn't even consider myself a kicking coach, but there was one kid I had, Tyler Newhagen. No one expected him to be a kicker. He was a soccer player. In fact, the first day we coached him, he never got a ball above the crossbar. And I said to him jokingly, "You realize this is not soccer where you got to kick it over the bar." But he ended up being one of the best ever because he was in the record book. He went 4 for 4 at Verona in a playoff game, and at that time there was only 3 kids in the state of Wisconsin to go 4 for 4.
Yeah, I remember that.
So he ended up having I think he kicked 13 or 14 field goals that year.
You talked about your dad being called Tricky Dick because some of the trick plays that he ran, but primarily he was known as a running coach. I mean,
Right.
He loved to run. What do you think he'd think of MG's offense from last year with 3,000 yards passing?
He was probably rolling in his grave. He did not believe in the passing game. He just thought, my dad's whole idea, not only in football but anything, was we have to reduce as much risk as possible. And in his mind, passing is risky. He thought to be in high school, to have a quarterback good enough to throw it a receiver good enough to catch it and a line good enough to block long enough for that to happen. You just don't get that in high school. We're doing that now. We've had a pretty good run of quarterbacks here, and so it was foreign to him. But right before he died, Torrin Young always wanted to meet my dad because Mike had told him all about him.
Oh, your dad would have loved coaching that kid.
I had brought Torrin over, and it was like a love affair. The two of them just fell in love with each other in 5 minutes. And when Torrin left, I went back to the house, and my dad was pacing. He's like, I wish I could come back and coach that kid. Torrin just lit him up. It was amazing to see that.
I was going to throw that one at you later on, wondering what your dad would have thought of him.
He loved him.
I got a chance to meet.
He thought he was unbelievable, and obviously he is.
Yeah, he's definitely a unique talent. All right, your dad had 165 career wins here. You mentioned never 2 losses in a row, 15 conference championships, 2 state championships. He's inducted in the National High School Coaches Association Hall of Fame, other honors. What made him proud? What was he proud of?
He was tremendously humble. I mean, when we published his obituary, I couldn't believe what I was reading. We basically got that obituary mostly from the Wisconsin Football Coaches Association. Mm-hmm. There was a third of the stuff in there I didn't even know that he did. He wouldn't even tell us. I mean, you mentioned the National Hall of Fame. He's the first Wisconsin football coach to be inducted in the National Football Hall of Fame, and he never told us in the family. I actually read about it. Doug Moe had that section he wrote in the Capital Times. So I was sitting at lunch one day, and it said Dick Rundle to be inducted in the National Coaches Hall of Fame. So I called him up and I said, "What's going on?" He goes, "Don't worry about it. It's just a dumb award." So he wouldn't let us come. And I found out later it was a whole day event. There was a big luncheon. There was a awards thing. There was a halftime introduction at a football game. And he left. After the first segment, he got in the car and drove home. And by the time they figured out he was gone, they called him in the car, and he was in Omaha. It was in Omaha. By the time they caught him, he was in Iowa. Or almost through Iowa. So
making a break for it.
He just didn't want a lot of accolades. He did it for just the wanting to win.
Sure.
Make kids better. His whole deal was to make people better, no matter what they were doing.
He certainly had an impact here. I mean, look at the legacy that he left and the schools carried on. I mean, Mike stepped right in and picked up where your dad left off. There was a gap between them, but
there was times we'd leave the locker room. Mike would do some of my dad's speeches almost verbatim. It was bone chilling to watch, and even the hand motions and the way he would talk to kids and lean forward to them. Those were all my dad's traits. I mean, he had it down to a T. It was really fun to watch. And Brandon's, I mean, the three of them they're almost identical. I mean, the program is above everybody else. You know, making kids better is still. Brandon and Mike and my dad would hold a kid out if they had to.
Sure.
Even if it meant maybe we won't win.
Were there many former players that stayed in touch with your dad?
Oh yeah, there's a lot of them. A lot of them would like to have seen him more. Not a lot of people realize the last 10 or 15 years my dad was tremendously private. He focused his whole attention on his family. And a little bit, I mean, he was the president of the High School Coaches Association, so he put a lot of time into that, which is his way of giving back. But he was a family man at the end, and he really, people would call me and say, "I'd love to talk to your dad or go see your dad," but he got really private at the end. So it's a shame. Like Mike, in 2013, when we were going to win the state title, Mike asked me to ask him to give the pregame speech. And my dad was really uncomfortable with that because he never liked giving speeches to begin with, but he said, "This is Mike's time, I'm done." And he said, "If I go in there and give that speech and Mike wins, it's going to go around the coaching community that I did it." He goes, "This is Mike's time and I need to stay out of the way." So.
And it turned out to be one of the most spectacular comebacks in school history.
Unbelievable.
That was fantastic. I was at that one and thought it was over at halftime.
I got to admit, I thought it was over too, and I never give up. And that team that we beat was so good.
They were extremely talented.
Greendale.
MG had a pretty good team that year too.
It was that team was so resilient. There was no quit. I mean, it was bleak. They scored just about every possession, and we didn't score at all. And our kids, when we went in at halftime, you could tell the kids weren't phased at all.
Sure. Tell me a little bit about the relationship with Mike Stasi. You've talked a little in the interview and some beforehand. You know, he and Mike were pretty close, clearly.
My dad and Mike?
Yeah.
Yeah. My dad wrote a lot of letters to Mike. At the end, that's how my dad was such a shut-in at the end of his life. He would sit and write letters to people all day. I mean, he knew people in the NFL, college level. He wrote letters to Mike. He admired from afar, but he never missed anything. He watched every game, and he would call me all the time and say, "Why did you guys do this? And why aren't you doing this?" He was constantly wanting to do more, but he really wanted to stay out of the way. He thought the world of Mike. I think Mike thinks the world of him. They were like a father and son.
Yeah, it's clear that they were very close, and Mike thought the world of your dad.
Mike pretty much lived my dad's life. He wanted to be a Phi Ed teacher. He wanted to coach football, and Mike and I have talked about my dad 100 times. I mean, he loves him, and my dad loved having him as a player. I mean, he just said, "There's nothing I can't do with that kid." And Mike could take over a game.
Yeah.
That was such a great team. With Mark Goff was such a punishing runner and so quick to the hole. And then you had Mike, who was more moves. I mean, Mark Goff was a battering ram, and Mike could take it outside. And Hugh Griffin and Ron Sam and Mark Topper, and that team was loaded with talent. Mike Shukart,
Zwart, Kyle Matthews. I mean,
but that was one of my dad's revelations in football. That was the beginning of bringing the whole team over to our house and having barbecue and hot dog feeds and who can eat the most hot dogs. But what my dad learned, and then I know he talked about this a lot, is they started getting closer as a team. And my dad said at the end of his career, it wasn't my best teams that won, it was the teams that had the best people and that were closest. And Mike and Brandon promote that all the time. And so the parents do a great job now having the spaghetti dinners on Thursdays, and it's really, MG is a special place.
Yeah, it really is. Any last stories you want to tell about your dad? Something to leave us with?
Well, if he could see us now, it'll be 2 years that he passed away this October. If he knew I was sitting here, he'd probably ground me. So I don't know.
I appreciate you taking the risk here. This is pretty special. This 40th anniversary of this team. It was a special team, and of course your dad was key to all of this.
Yeah, and they did the '84 state champs. Was it last year or the year before? It must have been 2 years ago, and maybe even 3 now. But that's one of the happiest I've ever seen my dad when they came back and did the 30-year reunion of the '84 champs. I don't know if I've ever seen him happier than he was that night.